David Jordan is the private advisor to CEOs, specialising in creating results through strategic innovation. Welcome to this week's segment.
The challenging the status quo is a big challenge for any CEO. There are a number of areas that we try to explain to CEOs. It's not just about challenging the status quo, but challenging it big. We often think about is that we're going to modify a widget on the factory line. We need to be thinking about, do we actually have the factory line? I mean, really need to step back and say, I'm starting from scratch, what would I do? And it's a real challenge. Take Microsoft. Microsoft has Microsoft Office. It's a flagship product. It brings in billions of dollars of revenue. Imagine the scenario that the CEO comes into the board and says, we're going to cannibalize our flagship product. We're going to have an internet-based office, which is not going to pull in the same revenue. But they had to do it because organizations like Google was bringing in internet-based office products. So they had to cannibalize their own business. That is big, tough decision making that you have to do. Another problem that companies have is what we call the boiling frog syndrome, where it'd be nice to have a digital disruptor that suddenly pitches up in the horizon because everybody red flags it, and suddenly the development teams, everybody's focused on solving that problem. Sadly, the situation is that the problem is in small bits. And we call it the boiling frog syndrome, because basically if you drop a frog into boiling water, it jumps out, but if you leave the frog in the water and slowly heats it up, by the time it realizes it's in danger, it's too late. And that's what a lot of companies are happening to. A very good example of that is Kodak. Now, a lot of people don't realize is that Kodak invented the digital camera. It was an unusual product, but it was the digital camera. And yet Kodak went out of business because of the digital camera. And the problem was that Kodak thought it had time to react to the digital camera industry. And they're too slow in changing, too slow in responding, and their competitors overtook them. So there's a number of areas about challenging the status quo that CEOs really need to step back and not just think about fiddling around the edges, but really wholesale, significant change about what the business is so that you're reacting to what is going on with your competitors and how your customers changing. Successful companies don't have smart innovations, they're smart about how they innovate. And this is the big challenge. It's not about my competitors rushed out and introduced this new product, so we've got to duplicate them. One of the CEOs raised the problem of always following is that you can't drive price, because by the time that you've caught up, you're basically in a market where everybody else is copying that same innovation. And the other problem is that your competitor's driving your business plan. It's very important is that, yes, you've got to recognize that the innovations keep changing, but don't focus on following. Think about how you can leapfrog. Big issue that's probably difficult for a lot of people to think about is you don't innovate one product. You have to create an environment where you're constantly replacing innovation. You know, if you look at what happened with Apple coming up with the iPod and iTunes model, great idea. How many years did it get replaced by technology like Spotify? And now it's being leapfrogged again. So the problem is that you don't have an innovation and you're going to live on it for the next 50 years. Within 3 or 4 years, that technology is going to be replaced, or that innovation is going to be replaced. So if you're going to spend the next 3 years innovating, think about how you can jump or leapfrog your competitors with that 3 years, rather than actually spend that 3 years just trying to be the same as them. One of the things we're trying to get the innovation mindset is that when we're trying to think about the customer and we're thinking about all this technology and innovation, we often overcomplicate the scenario, and it's really important to shift our thinking, simplify, really understand what the problem is you're trying to solve. A very good example was a university competition for robotics students, and the competition was to build a robot that could navigate a maze. This was a considerable effort of trying to work out how we knew that the robot had gone down this path and that was unsuccessful, so we don't want to go down that path again, and so on. We've worked out all this logic. Then this group came along and they created a robot that had a right arm. And all it did was to follow the wall of the maze. And if you follow the wall of a maze all the way around, you will eventually come out. Might be a long way of doing it, but you will eventually come out of the maze. And they won the competition. And everybody cried foul, you know, they thought this isn't fair. But it was simplicity, and it's really important with innovation is to keep it simple, really work on what are you doing to solve the problem. And it was a very good example to get people to actually step back and really think about, hang on a sec, we're overcomplicating it. Another example of it is a scenario that I raised before, was to say about a baby falling out of a 20-story building. And how did it survive? As soon as I raised that and said it was a 20-story building, everybody thinks straight away that it fell from the 20th floor. So the actual way I've said it was to actually take you to that path. And when you look at people like mind readers, that's their whole skill, is to actually lead you down a path of thinking. So they will actually get you to think a number by suggesting words, etc., to lead you to that. It's a trap of human nature. When I said, how did it survive out of the 20th floor building? The baby fell out of the ground floor. But as soon as I said it, people were stuck on, it fell out of the 20th floor, and then we're trying to solve that problem that way. This is where lateral thinking is very important, because lateral thinking is about trying to break that vertical process where I'm following a path and actually just shift sideways, to look at things from an angle, look at things from a different perspective. So it's very important, and that's what the CEO Innovation Blueprint is trying to challenge at the moment, is to try and get people to step back and see how we could look at it a different way. One of the problems that we've seen since the global financial crisis is that before the global financial crisis, people were very focused on the 80-20 rule, the 20% of work to deliver 80% of the revenue, focused on the lower hanging fruit. After the global financial crisis, it's really a scenario is that the low-hanging fruit's been picked. So how do I create business now? And it's all about integration. It's about the actual dealing with the complexity. We don't have a situation of just solving this specific scenario for a customer. We need to look at the whole flow from point A to point B. So integrated is really to try and look at things from a more complex scenario. So don't look at that low-hanging fruit of just we can solve that simple problem, to actually looking at a whole scenario. So one of the companies that is actually coming out as a competitor to Uber, helping taxi industry, is actually looking at the whole thing of the payment process, ordering of the taxi, getting the payment sorted out before the taxis arrived. It's about actually dealing with a whole range of scenarios where, if you look at what's happening at the moment, is the taxi industry is only focusing on something like booking a taxi, and Uber is more focused on maybe ordering the taxi. So these are all the issues that are really starting to say we actually got to look at a little bit more complexity of the problem that we're solving for the customer. And it's not just one component, it could be 2, 3, 4, 5 components.
To get your copy of David Jordan's book, The CEO Innovation Blueprint, go to his website, theceoblueprint.com.au.